Well, hello ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this latest video in the YII2 series. In this video, we're going to look at the basic use of databases and how it works with the model view controller system within YII. I've used the database from the YII2 manual just for this session. Okay, let's get started. The first thing, and it's very important, is that you must have PDO MySQL installed. So you have to have the PDO extension. If you need to check this, you can go into your PHP ini file and make sure that PDO and PDO MySQL are both not commented out. If they are, just uncomment them and then restart your server. Okay, so that's that. Now we're using MariaDB, and there are one or two gotchas with MariaDB because it's not really keeping up with MySQL, and consequently certain things don't work. Now most of the internet servers actually do use MySQL and not MariaDB, so it's not something we need to worry about too much. It's just the fact that there could be one or two problems in the development environment, but not necessarily in the production environment. These are not things that we need to worry about at the moment. Okay, the first thing we need to do is we need to create a table. Because YII deals with database tables, we have to have a table. As I said, this is coming from the YII manual, so let's create the table, and the table name is going to be country. The first thing we need is a country code, and this is going to be just 2 because it's going to be the code of the country, and we're not going to allow null. Okay, and it is going to be a primary key. So we'll accept the index on that. So the code, it is unique, it's just 2 characters long. There is no default on this, and it is the primary key. The second one is the name of the country, and again this will be character, and I don't think any countries have more than about 52 characters in their name. And then finally, we're going to have the population of the country. This is just going to be a straight integer, and we're going to set the default to 0. So that will be the default. Now, all of these are not null. We're not going to accept a null value for any of these. So we will save that. Now, we need to actually add some data into the database, and probably the best way of doing this is via a SQL code, because this is going to take quite a long time. So I've created a gist, and I've got some code for you, so I shall copy and paste. So here we have 10 countries, and if I click go, we should have, now clicking on browse, the 10 countries are now entered. So we have the code, the name, and the population. Okay, that's the database finished. We can close that. We don't need it anymore just for now. Okay, so now we're in NetBeans. We now need to start. Now the first thing we need to do is we need to model the information that's in the database. So if we come to models, and if you right click on it and go to new PHP file, and we're going to call this country. Now it must have a capital C. This is very important. It must have a capital C, and I'll just click finish, and it will create that. Now it puts a lot of data in mine. It's not necessary for you. You don't have to worry about this. It's just, so what I will do is, just for this one, I'm going to remove all of that. Now the first thing is we need to tell it which namespace we're using. So namespace, and it's app because it descends from the YII2 application, and the folder is models. Oops, does help. Okay, so that's very important. This won't work properly if you don't have the namespace in. Next, we need a uses. So use YII because it's going to use the YII system. Now, because we're using a database, we need to tell the system that we're using a database. So here we have to set some properties, and this is actually for YII and for various IDEs so that they know which properties are being used. So if you remember, we set up code, name, and population. So all I've done is copied and pasted this in, and this is the class for the basic data, for the class. Okay, so now we have to set up the class itself. So class, capital C for country, and it extends a particular class, and this will be the YII DB active record. And okay, so that's the name of the class set up. Now there's a couple of things that we have to do in here. The first thing is we need to set up the table name. It needs to know which table it's actually going to be using. So this is public, and it's a static function. And okay, and we're going to have function name, which is table, and then name in uppercase. Okay, and it's put in a param which we don't want, so we'll just delete the parameter. And in here we're just going to return the name of the table. Now if you're using table prefixes, and this is probably a very good idea to use them, then I would recommend that you put 2 curly brackets followed by the %, and then followed by the word country, and then 2 closing curly brackets. And what that does is it allows you to use table prefixes within your code. It doesn't matter if you don't have a table prefix, it just allows you to use it, so it's a good thing to put it in. The next thing we need are some rules. Now I will discuss rules in a couple of videos time. Oops, what happened there? That's better. Okay, so I'll discuss rules in a couple of videos time, and we need to change the name of the function to rules. There's no parameters. Oh, I see. My mistake. I have put it outside of the class. Oops. So let's put it inside the class, and Control Shift and F will make it look all nice and pretty. The reason why YII uses rules is something called massive assignment, and if it has a rule, it will automatically assign it with the database properties which we've got up here. If it hasn't got a rule, it will ignore it. So we need to put some rules in. So the first thing we do is we create an array, and that array is going to contain the rules. So the first one is, let's have the fact that they're required. So in here, if you remember, code and name were required. Now population was also required, but that's something, oops, does help if I put in, okay, code and name are required. Now the next one is that population, if you remember, is an, I do keep forgetting these, is an integer, and we now then need to tell it that code is a string. I will learn eventually. It's just I'm assuming it does it for me. I'm getting very lazy in my old age, making certain assumptions. And the next one is, of course, name, and that is also a string, and the max for that was, if you remember, 52. Okay, I'll go into what this all means a bit later on in another video, in probably about 2 videos times, when we do rules and validation. But at the moment we need it. We need to have at least the 3, otherwise YII will not do anything with it. Now we can also have another thing which is actually very useful in here, and this is attributes. So if we create another function, and we're going to call the function attribute labels, and as you can see, it overrides one that we actually have. We don't need any parameters in there, and again we're going to return some labels which we'll be using as the default within within the program. Now what I'm going to do here is just put in the base label. So first of all we have code, and we want that to be uppercase code. Then we have name, and we want that to be again uppercase name, and finally population, and now that will be uppercase population. Now you might think, well, why am I actually doing this, because it's not really needed for here. Well, one of the nice things about YII is it allows you to do translations, and by doing this you can add a little bit of code here which will allow you to create translations for all the strings that you use. And so it's really quite important to do this, because we're getting so many countries now and so many translations are required. So I'll just tidy that up. Now for the country model, that's all that we need for now, because it's going to extend active record, and most of the functions that it needs for this piece of code is in active record. Okay, so we can save, and the next thing we create is we now need to create the controller. So if we come to controllers, new, and PHP file, and we're going to call this country controller, but this needs again capital C, and it must contain the word controller with a capital C. Okay, that's very, very important. It needs to contain that. Okay, again I shall just delete all of that, and first of all we need the namespace, and that is of course app controllers, and we now need the use, and here we have YII, and then we're going to use web, and then we're going to use controller. We need another one. Now I thought we'd actually try a data widget here, so let's try pagination, and that's in data and pagination. And finally, of course, we need to link to the model, because if we don't link to the model then we can't use it. So remember, that's app models, and it's country. And as you can see, YII has found that it found it automatically in country here. Okay, so those are the headings done. Next, we actually need to create the class itself. So class, and it's going to be called country controller. Remember the capitals, that's very important. And it extends controller controller. Okay, I'm going to remove that because we're actually using the web controller above, and here we have the class. So the first thing we need to do in the class is we need to create an action, and we need to do the default action, which of course is called index. So public function, and action is in lowercase, capital I, index, and there are no parameters for this. Now we now need to retrieve the information from the database. So if we create a query, and it will come from, where are we, country, and we're going to find, okay, so we've created the query, and next we need to do the pagination, which I showed you above. So let's start that. So pagination, and we need to create a new pagination. Let's see if it finds it. Yes, it does. Okay, and we want to put an array inside of that. So let's do that. Okay, so we need, for the pagination, the default number of items on the page. So default page size, and it does help if I remember to put the, one of the nice things about Apache NetBeans is that you can do things like that and it will actually sort it out for you when, of course, you make a mistake. And I do keep thinking it's going to do it for me, and I do forget. So we want query, and we're going to go for count. So that solves that one. So we've set up the pagination. Now we need to set up the countries. So we'll have a countries array, and we will put the query and order by, and in here we'll order by name, and then we'll do an offset, and this is for the pagination, and you can see we actually set the default page size to 5, so we're going to just put the offset into there, and then we need a limit, and in here we need pagination limit, and finally we're going to return all, and that one is now done. Now the last thing we need to do is actually show a page. So here we're going to set up a system of rendering, rendering the page. We're going to call the page, of course, index because it's the default page, and we now need to pass some information to that page. So we need to pass the information about the countries. So, and we also need to pass information about pagination and pagination. And that's all there is to it. That's the country controller now set up. It only actually has one index, so it's only going to show one page. And that's that. Okay, so make sure I've got my last semicolon. That's really good to have the error checking there. I'll just check that this looks okay, looks okay, looks okay, looks okay. Right, so we will now save that. Now finally we need to create the view. So if we come down to views, now here we've got to create a view folder with the same name as the controller, but the folder has to have a lowercase. So if we come in here and create a folder called country, and then inside country we need a new PHP file which we're going to call index, and click on finish. Now this will create again some things for me which we don't need. Okay, so the first, we need to use some helpers with this, so I shall put them in. And the first helper, of course, is HTML because we're going to be using HTML. And the second helper is a widget for the pagination. So we'll come to widgets, and it's called link pager, and that's that started. Okay, so that's the first part. We now need to put some HTML in here, so let's put the header in. So countries, because there's more than one, and we now need an ordered list of the countries. So we can now put in some code to actually return the list that we need. So we need to extract it from the array that we created before. So we'll do that. Oops, I don't really need all of that. So let me have a, we don't need a value on that. So let me get rid of that. So we'll call that country, and the array, of course, is called countries. Okay, first. So where are we? Close the PHP. I don't need that. And now we can actually put in, oops, we can now put in some code. And one of the nice things that the HTML helper has is it allows us to clean the content that we're going to use and make sure that there is no problem. So we now need curly brackets, and the country code space, yeah, and then the curly brackets again, country name, and then we need to put in the population. So this will be country population, and we need to close that. I think that's probably what the error is. Let's just see if that's the case. It is. And then finally, just tidy this up a little bit, we need, of course, to put in the information about the... I usually turn that off actually because it does get rather annoying. I must do that. So we need to put in the link pager, the link pager widget information at the bottom, so that we have that. And it was, if you remember rightly, we called it Pagination, and it was Pagination, as I recall, and get rid of that. Okay, now that looks correct. Just check this through. It seems correct. I don't see an error, so we'll save that. Now we're going to run this, and it will actually bring in the first page, but here we actually need it not on the main index, but we need it on the country. So if we type in country, so now we actually have an error. So obviously here we have access denied for localhost John. So I will just go and change my password information. Okay, I've changed the password information, and we have a problem with unknown property. Total country, unknown property. Aha. Page size, and shouldn't have. It should be total count. Okay, I spotted the error. I'd called total count total country for some reason. So if I save that, and we will refresh, and as you can now see, it's working. Now it's picked up the header and the footer from the layouts, so we've got all of that, and as you can see, it's now just giving us a basic list of the countries. We have our pagination system here, and you can see we have all of the countries listed. Okay, so that's the basics of the tutorial. So what happens, just to quickly recap, you create a model first, okay, and that's important to create the model first, because this actually is a representation of the data in the database and what you want to show to the end user. Then you create the controller, and the controller will have a number of actions in. This one just has the one action for index, but it can have a number of actions in it, and we'll see that in the next video. And this is what happens when somebody actually types in an address or clicks a button which links to a particular page. And this is index. So first of all, it sets up the data. It finds everything from country. Now this is, if you know about SQL and data, this is probably not the best way to do it, because you're returning all the data, so you're returning a lot of information. And then we set up the pagination here. So we tell it how many pages. You can change the number of pages here. So if we change it to 6, we'll see 6 items on the page. If we change it to 10, we'll see all. The total count is the total number of records that are returned by country find. So it knows how much, the pagination unit knows how much to do. Then we put the data into an array called countries, and we set it all up on that. And then finally we create the view, and we send to the view 2 variables, countries and pagination, and these are then used. The countries is used in a for each loop to show the countries, and the pagination variable is to set up how we want to see the pagination. Okay, I hope you found that useful. What I wanted to do was show you how to do it manually, because normally we don't do any of this manually. But if you understand how it works manually, when you come across a problem, then it's much easier to fix. Okay, so the next one we're going to look at G. We're going to start with a proper database, and we're going to use that database all the way through the tutorial. So I hope you found it useful. My name's John, and we'll see you next time.